Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My name is Ali Salaam. My birth name is Alex Fidel, although my parents pronounce it differently. I was born in 1991 in New York City, and my family is Jewish, but non-practicing, so it's the ethnic view of Judaism. And so my childhood was, I think, very much kept in a bubble, a very materialistic life. I never knew what it was like for a parent to lose a paycheck or to have unsatisfactory food supplies or anything that people who live close to or below the poverty line go through, because I wouldn't know, because I've never had that experience before. So we kind of lived in dreamland, the American dream, so to speak. Going through school, going through elementary school. I kind of, was, unconsciously, you always kind of try to do what would make you most accepted, trying to fit in. And you don't do very ethical things when you do that. And I had a big epiphany my last year in elementary school before we moved from New Jersey to California. There was a kid, I think he was autistic, and the kids used to make fun of him. And I took part in a lot of the unfortunate jest. And on the last day of school, because everybody knew I was moving out of the state, a lot of people would sign my shoes with a pen, and then the kid, he signed my shoe, and that just hit me, and I just realized what have I been doing just to gain the acceptance of others. So that kind of clicked in me, and I wanted to change when I came. I wanted to try to have a backbone and always try to be myself. So that was a good stepping stone, but still without God, without guidance. I still had a long ways to go, obviously. My parents were not practicing, and maybe that was a good thing. It left me with a clean slate to be able to soul search, and which would eventually lead me to Islam. Because I would later learn about certain views within Judaism, supremacist views, particularly within the Talmud, a man-made document separate from the divinely revealed Torah, and obviously issues of Zionism would come up a little bit obviously later in my life. But my parents didn't really try to, and they weren't involved with congregations themselves. So if my dad tried to nudge me towards organized religion in the Jewish sector, I would reject it, and I said I'm not interested. And that was just because I just wasn't interested. I had no knowledge of what I would learn later in life. My first inclination towards something that was greater than myself, I guess, came through politics, because the first thing I ever identified with religiously, so to speak, was with atheism, but that was more out of a cynicism towards organized religion, Judaism, and Christianity specifically. But when it came to politics, I kind of just saw both so-called left and so-called right being, it seemed very divisive and not the real answer. So I ended up picking up Ron Paul's End the Fed and the Revolution book in 2009 or 2010. And that kind of opened up my parameters, that there's more ways of thinking than just the standard this way or that way. I started reading, and that was about my senior year of high school. And then I went into college, and I had the idea of going as a business major, but I decided to take a radio course, and they would let you go on the air right away. It was Sonoma State University, and I had a radio show, and it was a bit of an opinion radio show. And with Ron Paul being my avenue, I went into the kind of secular, watered down libertarian worldview, which is largely funded by the Koch brothers. So obviously I had a long ways to go politically, and being influenced by atheism, even though a lot of libertarians support non-interventionist foreign policies, is from an Orientalist perspective. So all those people are always fighting, it's just because they're savage barbarians and everything like that. It's really disgusting, and I would later learn that really the authors, the main figures behind atheism, Bill Maher, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens. They all are propagandists for wars, for the left side of the spectrum. You have Fox News that riles up the right side of the spectrum, but they and I would later learn when I was researching Islam that everything they were saying was false. Like Christopher Hitchens and I was reading his book, God is Not Great, and how many times do I say Allahu Akbar during the day now, subhanAllah. I was being deliberately kind of misinformed about Islam during my time as an atheist, and I could see how it was making me arrogant. Like their view was like, oh, I'm so smart, I'm better than all these pea-brained, savages, especially those people in the global south, aka the third world. And so I guess journalism allowed me to grow, and eventually that kind of came into conflict with me. So through journalism, I didn't think I was a journalist until I started to see like Obama continue the same policies as Bush, and I was starting to report on that, and I noticed that all these well-paid anchors on all the major news networks were not saying a word about it. So it helped me to really kind of like hone my perspective on foreign policy in particular. And as I studied more of it, the more it kind of like hit me in the heart. And that's when I started to question my atheism, because I started to think, well, if all these like innocent children are dying, and for what cause? For the petrodollars, for oil, for the Federal Reserve, for profits, there has to be something greater than just the physical world. And this atheism is just like, there's nothing more than just my five senses, and it's all based on kind of like moral relativism, where everyone's like truth has equal weight. The way Allah put Islam in my life was through stages, and He used the medium of journalism, and my I wasn't interested in kind of like celebrity stardom. Like I didn't want to be like the next like Brian Williams or anything like that. I was genuinely interested in seeking the truth and trying to do a good job at being a journalist, which is to make the world a better place and speak truth to power. So around 2012, I ended up, and so I had the idea that there was something deeper, obviously with elections being rigged in favor of the two-party system, wars continuing no matter which party is in power. I kind of had an inkling that something is terribly wrong here, and I ended up interviewing this guy by the name of Rick Simpson. He's a Canadian. I asked him what he thought about President Obama, and he said that he said that President Obama was like a Bilderberg member, and I thought, well, was he talking about Burger King or the Bilderberg Workshop? So I ended up looking up a lot of these things, and then even though I knew about the Federal Reserve, that kind of also implored me to learn about the history of the Federal Reserve, particularly how it was created in secret, that it's actually a private bank, and that's where the issue of usury kind of came up, and to see the tie of all these wars to the central banking. That Ron Paul said that a century of total war coincides with a century of central banking, and particularly families like the Rockefellers, who have a heavy influence over the American Medical Association, which tied into the man from Canada who was using alternative medicine to help people. That definitely kind of rearranged my eyeglass, so to speak. And then after that, I started looking into the issue of alternative explanations for September the 11th. And I didn't even know that there was a third building that collapsed at free fall speed with no plane hitting it. And so I began to think well, maybe Islam has nothing to do with what I've been told, aside from maybe, and at this time I knew a little bit about Saudi Arabia and Wahhabism. So maybe, Wahhabis were just, kind of used, but there was a bigger thing going on around them, and there's lots of evidence. There's a group of architects that are in the thousands. They've signed a petition calling for a new investigation, and this is actually a movement that was started by the 9/11 victims' families. So to stand for this is very much patriotic and in support of the families. So around this time, when I'm beginning to question a lot of things about the reality I've been told, and also around this time, I also began to look into the issue of Zionism. and Palestine, and it created definitely a very emotional journey for me. Wondering if I'm responsible for it, like if I'm responsible for all this death and suffering, and I began to realize that as an individual, since I've never pulled a trigger, I've never been to occupy Palestine before. I'm not responsible as long as I speak out, and I will continue to speak out until my last breath. I took a oath upon myself to do that, and it was definitely a growing process to be able to discover these types of issues. And what was interesting is that on 9/11, actually the only people to ever be arrested were 5 Israeli Mossad agents, and that was like, I read that there's like a leak or a government document obtained by the Freedom of Information Act, and I spent one Sunday reading that, and it just like shattered my world. And definitely in a wake, like I really recently learned the Arabic term yaqza, which is awakening, and I think I went through a pretty big awakening process in the beginning of the year 2013. So conveniently around this time, a few hip hop artists who were either Muslim themselves or had Islamic influence or respect for Islam kind of crept their way into my life, like Public Enemy, Immortal Technique, and Brother Ali. And I remember turning on Revolutionary Volume 2 from Immortal Technique, and some of the things I can remember, like from the fourth branches, like a fake church called the Prophet Muhammad a terrorist, forgetting God is not religion but a spiritual bond, and Jesus is the most quoted prophet in the Quran. And that blew me away because I had no idea what Muslims believed in. I didn't know that Muslims believed in Jesus, and then I would later find out Muslims also believe in Moses and every other prophet. I had my radio show at the time, and so I ended up interviewing a Muslim activist, but instead of asking them about politics, like out of my own interest to learn, I asked them about Islam. And so what they had to say, like about the Islamic view of justice, the oneness of God, the oneness of all the prophets, Islam's view on just economic systems and banking systems and financial systems, it really stood out for me, and to me it aligned with everything that I was thinking. And so I was doing a bit of canvassing on a local college campus, and a week before I had been on that same campus wearing a Palestinian flag as a cape for Halloween, because I had seen some the college Zionists wearing like the Israeli flag as a cape like a couple months before. So I wanted to counter that. So a week later, a group of sisters came up to me, and they said, "Oh, I saw you a week ago. Were you the one wearing the Palestinian flag?" And I was like, "Yeah, that was me." And they were like, "Would you like a free copy of the Quran?" And I hadn't thought about that before. I wasn't. And this is the way the type of nudging towards Islam like came to me, as opposed more than I was searching myself. I was doing searching, but it was mostly coming in my direction. And so I said yes, and I ended up reading it. And the first thing is the last khutbah of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam. The fact that 1400 years ago he was saying, that no white is superior to a black and vice versa, no Arab is superior to a non-Arab and vice versa, except by piety and goodness of character. That was big, and to think that it has a divine weight to it, that this person is a prophet, not just like a regular person. As good as Martin Luther King was, he still was not on a divine level the seal of the prophets, the continuation of Prophet Jesus and Moses, peace be upon them. His stance against usury and interest, and for justice and forgiving women rights and everything like that. It just really stood out for me. And then I ended up reading the first couple surahs of the Quran. I met a couple brothers at the masjid, and then we sat for the lecture, and then we went to a restaurant, and I took my shahada there in December 2013. And I just felt really amazing. And the first thing when I went home is I tried to do salat and try to learn the positions, but I was I was actually doing it in the bathroom because I needed to kind of keep it on the down low for my family at the time. And I heard a similar story from Sheikh Hashim Aluddin up in the Bay, and he said that even that was bad. It was still like your intentions are probably pure, because obviously the bathroom is a dirty place. So I didn't tell my parents. They eventually kind of found out. So it was interesting because it wasn't like a big surprise, because obviously my views on Palestine, I was very open about. I would always talk about it, and we got into a lot of arguments. It wasn't. This was something that wasn't easily dealt with, and so Islam. The moment my parents found out that I was a Muslim, I heard my dad say under his tongue like he was going to run away from like home or something like that, and then my parents would always question me of like, am I a terrorist or something like that? And so I'd always in the political discourse, brought things up, that, Osama bin Laden was supported by the American government and things like that. So that I told them, I saw the true light of Islam, the real Islam. What you're seeing on TV is fake Islam. Things were very cliquish, based around ethnicity or perceived religious superiority. Religiosity. So if the brothers that I was learning from weren't there, I often felt very alone. Even the main masjids, where it's very populated and kind of multicultural, I would kind of just walk. Well, after the prayer, I would just walk to my car and go home. So it's very hard to be a Muslim when you're alone, when you don't have any Muslim friends. Like, the only friend I had was a non-Muslim, and I eventually had to, let that person go, because they were, involved with, drugs and things like that, and was very critical of not only my spiritual journey, but my political journey, my journalistic journey. So I never felt like, I was accepted. Like, no one ever gave me a pat on the back and say, like, you're doing a good job. You're actually a good person, or you're on the right track. Between friends and family, it was just constant criticism at that time. So alhamdulillah, it didn't let me stray from the religion. So around the time of Ramadan, after Ramadan, I had met a brother online, and none of us had our names changed at that time. Like, he hasn't changed his name, and I hadn't changed I had my name changed, but not on Facebook or anything like that. So he messages me. We eventually realized that we're Muslim, and he sends me this quote. He sends me this quote, and I look at it. It's really beautiful. It's really profound, and it's by a person named Imam Ali. And I look up this person, and I realize that this person has such high proximity to the Prophet. He's the son-in-law of the Prophet, the father of the Prophet's grandsons. And I basically learn about the Ahlul Bayt, Ali, Hassan, Hussein, Fatima, peace be upon them, and their beauty, the way, their embodiment of the true Islam that I saw, but yet the way that they were so brutally suppressed and oppressed, and that they were kind of omitted from history, and the fact that I had not learned any one of their names in 8 months of being a Muslim when they were this important, something just smelled wrong for me. And maybe this is my journalistic instinct, but it caused me to look deeper. And I realized that this is what is associated with Shia Islam. And so once I realized that I did want to follow the Islam of these people, the fear set in, like, am I going to be hurt by like some Wahhabi if I openly declare that I'm a Shia? And then I think about the tragedy of Ashura, and I just realized that I have to have no fear, and then I have to be like Hussein and alayhi salam. And then around late 2014, I decided that I wanted to be a Shia. Ultimately, as the tragedy of Ashura has taught us that tyranny cannot survive without our complicity. That if every single person that was in Yazid's army on the day of Ashura just said no, what would Ubaydullah bin Ziyad do? He can't do anything to them. He can't hurt them. It's really our mental slavery that prevents us from doing this. So if we have this spiritual yaqza, whether we are Muslim or non-Muslim, this is our human nature. Islam in Arabic is a verb. It's something that you do. And non-Muslims can have Islamic qualities in their action. And so I really hope that I can help shine the light of Ahlul Bayt into the world, and that it will help people just live better lives and be better towards each other, and that inshallah we can see an end to oppression, and that we can live in a very, very beautiful place, inshallah.